My focus has always been on public goods funding with crypto. I didn't really believe it. I didn't think that that was like possible, that an organization could be decentralized. You're effectively punishing your future self with how badly you want a decision in the moment. You're not being rewarded for your past self's decision that you have stuck with over time. Basically, the only reason that you should hold a
Right.
governance token is because you care about what the community is doing and you want to have a say, or you want to have ownership in how those decisions are getting made.
If you want to be in a community, you have to act like a community, and that means dealing with the types of issues that communities deal with.
Yeah, at the end of the
So,
day, it's the
yeah.
quality of the people that are going to decide whether you're a community or not. What we really can do in crypto is make public goods much better funded and much better managed than they are today. And so we call all of these public goods where the world is failing us and where we can step in and use these people and this technology to make it significantly better. And that's our opportunity in this space.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Blockchain Socialist Podcast. I'm Josh, and I'm here with Paul Glavin, who is the founder of Gardens V2, which is a really interesting governance application developed under OneHive, which uses this interesting voting mechanism called conviction voting. It is also a mechanism that I wrote about in my book, Blockchain Radicals. So I'm really interested and excited to have Paul Glavin here to talk about what they've built and what conviction voting is and what is interesting about it. Hey Paul, how you doing? Want to give an introduction to our audience about who you are, where you come from, and maybe start talking about maybe like the history of OneHive and what it is.
Yeah. Um, I'm Paul. I am, as you mentioned, the founder of Gardens V2. I have been a contributor at OneHive since 2021. That's about how long that I've been a full-time contributor in this um, capital allocation decision mechanism space of crypto. Um, my focus has always been on public goods funding with crypto, and OneHive was the the like kind of first organization that I found that like really captured my interest in uh, what I thought could be most powerful and useful for the world um, about crypto. Um, so that's kind of like how I came into this space. The OneHive history is in 2021 or um, a little before then in 2020, there were some developers from Aragon who had read about conviction voting from block science. Michael Zargam was the original theorist, and then he worked with the Common Stack on kind of building out a model for what a richer signaling mechanism might look like. And some of the guys got really excited about this were some developers and contributors to Aragon at the time, and they put together a proposal to found OneHive. They got a grant from Aragon, and they built out a governance framework using conviction voting, and then also a subjective oracle that they built called Celeste. Um, and they crafted really this entire framework all around this decision mechanism, which was truly decentralized and could enable bottom-up governance. Um, so this, like as you can imagine, this was an enormous task for them to do back in this time. They had really smart developers
Yeah,
working on it. Um, on top
limited
of
tooling, I
how
imagine.
right, and back in 2021, we didn't have L2s. We didn't have like the scaling infrastructure. The UX of crypto was like 10 times worse than it was today, and it's still not great. And they, the OneHive built on the XDAI network, which at that time was like kind of felt like a test net, but it was the one place that you could experiment with things like on-chain governance that was cheap enough to actually build it. Um, but because this network was undeveloped, they needed to do a Uniswap fork, which they made called HoneySwap. The Celeste, the subjective oracle, was a fork of Aragon Court. And they also, some of the contributors forked Aave, the lending protocol. And so, like, literally building the infrastructure for the XDAI network from scratch, OneHive kind of basically built this little kingdom on XDAI network. And this is like way back in 2021. Um, so I came in 2021 when I first found OneHive. It had the Honey token. It had the conviction voting common pool where people could request funding from this common pool for whatever they wanted. Um, and when I saw that, I was instantly like, "This is really cool. This is like a fully functioning economic protocol that can fund anything." And my brain was immediately going towards public goods applications of that funding. Um, and um, the other element to it, which I did not understand at that point, was the DAO element. Um, and when I first came into OneHive, I had kind of heard about this concept of a DAO. I didn't really believe it. I didn't think that that was like possible that an organization could be decentralized. But I remember coming into the Discord at OneHive, and I saw that there was a meeting scheduled, and this meeting, it was the first call that everyone went on in OneHive, and it was a meeting between OneHive, the Gardens team, and the ETH Trader subreddit, which was launching a token, X Moons, and they wanted to launch a garden for X Moons, and so they had an open call, and I, who had never talked to anyone at OneHive before, was in this call and was hearing them discuss like the potential details of a partnership between these organizations. And that was like the first moment of like, oh shit, this is like, this is actually these guys at least are really trying to be open and transparent and have like a different type of organization. And then I had a lot of conversations with the contributors at that time, and they clearly, this was like intrinsic. They believed that this is the way that an organization should run, and like that is such a huge piece, because when the technology is not there yet, it really took the like individuals caring about that being like a core piece of, like a core value of the organization for it to actually work that way. So that was like the beginning of me being like Dow pilled, I guess. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was like definitely 2021 was definitely a moment I feel with DAOs for sure, and like the kind of the start of it, and it can be, I think, yeah, I imagine that experience in particular being like, oh wow, now I'm part of this conversation all of a sudden. Whenever, in day-to-day
right.
life, you don't feel like you're part of conversations about like partnerships or something like that, or you may not. I mean, if that's not part of your job, you don't feel like you get to be a part of that conversation.
Hmm. And the immediate assumption is that the real decisions are being made behind, in private chats between people, and like that there is a power dynamic somewhere that you don't have access to. Um,
Right.
and yeah, it made it feel like that wasn't the case, that you could come into this organization, and if you had ideas and like work ethic, you could do what you wanted and it could come to life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but then you can imagine all of the downsides of that, like all of the nightmare of decentralization, like
Right.
destroying everything at the same time.
Sure. Yeah. Now that we're a few years out of that, I think people are starting to, hopefully, I assume, take in the lessons of of what it means to then, or that it's a good, definitely a good idea to organize essentially in many ways, but it comes with its own set of pros and cons. And that's a different kind
Right.
of thing to traverse than like a
Yeah.
traditional kind of centralized corporation or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, Specifically as it related to OneHive in this time, the dynamic in the DAO was that you had the Gardens Working Group, which was kind of the core of the developers from Aragon, who were super smart guys. They understood like the PhD level theory behind this mechanism of conviction voting, and you would talk with them, and you understood that these were really intelligent people that are they're like uh, on a different level to some extent. Um, the greater one hive dynamic was that degen crypto had discovered this like exciting new organization, and there had been a faucet for the governance token back then, which a lot of people came into. um, and like
Mm.
there's just a flood of hundreds of people, and like all these ideas, and like the people who are all over the place, and this obviously the focus on price, people wanting the price of the governance token to go up. um, and the main other initiative going on at One Hive at the time was Honey Swap, and the liquidity farming that they were doing. And so that was like
Hmm.
alongside Gardens. I came in, my background is in growth and marketing in Web2, and so I came on as a growth and marketing contributor. I was helping both at Gardens and also with the Honey Swap farming. um, and like two different teams, two totally different dynamics of like the type of people who are contributing, um, and like the goals of the platform. um, and I learned like just as much from both of those, um, like especially about decentralized exchanges, AMMs, the like the Uniswap
Yeah.
protocol. And like that was something that did not interest me going into crypto. I didn't like, I either like thought that didn't matter, or I just considered it a degenerate thing. But like
Hmm.
actually digging into the weeds on that was another realization of like, this is critical infrastructure. This is also like really innovative, and like enabling people to make swaps with a smart contract, and not needing to like find another person to buy or sell from. Like having a one party, single party trade, that's like not something that's ever been possible before. So like, what does that open up for us now? um
Right.
yeah, yeah, that was kind of like the dynamic in One Hive at that time.
Yeah. I remember Honey Swap being, because I remember, you know, when I was first using XDAI, which by the way is the same chain that Breadchain uses, now called Gnosis Chain, but back then it was called XDAI, I think just the XDAI chain, which is a side chain of Ethereum. I remember Honey Swap being like the place you had to go to in order to swap anything on XDAI at the time. And I remember having to use it, I think because I was like swapping things for token engineering commons and maybe a couple of other different groups then. But yeah, it definitely felt like it was his own, almost like separate ecosystem that One Hive was kind of spearheading a bit in building that infrastructure for kind of like the basic things that you do in crypto. And I can imagine, a group developing a decentralized exchange and a group developing kind of like a more governance oriented application could have different ethoses like in what they're doing and how they're building and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, compare that to some people who forked another protocol that are trying to get as many tokens as you can get on the network,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, which is like just as valuable, but it's just like totally different mindset of of like,
Right, right.
yeah, yeah. And
So I
then
guess now, go ahead.
right. Yeah. Well, like the like long story short, after that is like XDAI loses the growth race to other side networks at first. Polygon came onto the scene. Polygon talked to Honeyswap and asked them to deploy. And the attitude, at least within One Hive at that time, was that like, don't worry about Polygon. Like XDAI is like, we have a lot of really good builders and a lot of like really good infrastructure here now. This is where the growth is going to happen. So they ignored Polygon. Polygon, of course, had like a much stronger growth focus and exploded in value, and that kind of left XDAI in the dust. Um, and then like in the meantime, all of the L2s were getting built, and people were kind of seeing into the future that like, okay, L2s are actually going to be kind of where Ethereum scales. So like all that kind of just drew attention away from XDAI and all of these projects, including OneHive. Um, so by
Yeah.
the time Gnosis was coming in and merging slash buying XDAI and making it Gnosis Chain, there had already been a like big recession of builders and growth on the XDAI network and within OneHive. So like yeah, by then it had kind of sealed the fate that at least OneHive in this infrastructure wasn't going to be like the basis of an enormous economic boom, the way
Right, right.
that like quick swap wound up
But
becoming
so
Polygon.
yeah. So I mean, so right now I think it sounds like HoneySwap is I think more or less deprecated at this point. But what is the yeah, I guess what is OneHive today? How would you describe it to people? What would you describe as like I think what's also interesting is like the ethos of the project.
Right. The ethos has stayed the same. The people who are still contributing care mostly about a decentralized organization that um, can incubate like basically Web3 platforms. Um, Gardens was the only working group that stayed active during this entire time. So we were kind of busy building Gardens V2, and OneHive had like many different attempts to try to coalesce around a vision and uh, like keep momentum to try to build something OneHive specific. Um, but I think like OneHive did collect some treasury during all this time, and so it has funds now, and there's not a clear direction. Um, but with Gardens V2, we have like within our working group, we've always had these ideas about the ways that we can integrate OneHive with Gardens V2. And so over the last like 2 or 3 months, we've been adding more governance pools that are um, like kind of forming the basis for how OneHive can make its next decisions, which has been um, it, it's been really fun to build that.
Hmm.
And like Gardens V2 is really useful for a lot of different organizations, but OneHive like is somehow the like most the best suited, the like most inline organization to take advantage of its ideas. Um, so the
Hmm.
like the most recent pool that is active in the V2 for OneHive is roadmap consensus. So anyone can create a
Hmm.
proposal for their like specific roadmap of the deliverables that OneHive is going to do in the next however long, and so we'll be able to get a
Hmm.
decentralized consensus on like what exactly we're doing at OneHive, um, which is like based on an initiative to do the same thing back in 2021. But that just came at like a time when there was too much um, like diverse interest going in different directions, and people couldn't
Right.
rally around anything. But my prediction is that that will get OneHive organized again towards like an actual thing that it's doing. Um, so
Mm.
I think it'll be more clear what OneHive is in the next couple months.
Right. Yeah, I'm super curious how that goes. Oftentimes, yeah, I mean, it sounds like almost like a way of just getting like feedback on what kind of people want out of the org, like an interesting way of kind of like signaling, what people want the organization to become. But maybe I think what would be interesting now is to kind of talk a bit about gardens and what exactly gardens is. Or there was gardens, now it's gardens V2, which is the one that's you're spearheading to build, and we've been playing around. I've been playing around with it a little bit and kind of playing around with the especially conviction voting mechanisms. But yeah, maybe I'll leave it at that if you want to explain kind of what gardens is and what you guys are doing, conviction voting for.
Okay. Yeah. So Gardens V2 is a modular conviction voting tool. Our so taking a step back, Gardens V1, it was the One Hive framework. It applied so that any organization could spin up their own One Hive style DAO for their treasury. Um, it was built under the assumption that a community's entire treasury would be managed by conviction voting. Um, that's something that we eventually learned is not like conviction voting is a mechanism. It's part of a tool set. A community wants to have many different tools in its tool set, um, and so our mindset going into Gardens V2 is that we wanted to preserve a community as a group of people who are agreeing to a social covenant, and that's kind of like the core keystone piece
Mhm.
of architecture for One Hive is the covenant.
Yeah.
Um, and if you join the community, you're agreeing to the covenant. It's like the terms and conditions, except more important than that because it's a subjective mission. It's like your constitution. Um, we wanted to preserve that as the center of a community, but then we wanted them to be able to spin up many different instances of conviction voting because that's our like wheelhouse. But our vision is to enable that covenant to be tied to many different types of mechanisms. Um, but so our first iteration of Gardens V2 is a covenant with a governance staking token, and people when they join the community, they stake the ecosystem staking token, and then they get access to the governance pools that are connected to that community. And so one community can set up
Hmm.
any number of instances of these decisions. It can be capital allocation, it can be some kind of on-chain event, and any type of decision that you would want to um, your community to be making. Um,
Right.
yeah, so the conviction voting element of it, conviction voting is time weighted voting. You stake support in proposals, and your support needs time to reach its full weight. Um, so the theory behind it, um, the, it like there's some very interesting articles that came out when conviction voting was first theorized, and the concept is a richer signaling mechanism. um, People being able to express not just whether they support something but how much they support it, and to be able to measure someone's conviction, meaning have they supported that proposal a lot over a long period of time, because if so, then we can feel a lot more confident that that's something that the community wants to execute. So conviction voting is designed to enable that kind of richer decision making. um, and but like very simply, it is just time weighted support. And so like the probably like the easier way to think about how that winds up becoming useful for a community is the types of protections that gives you from a governance decision. So um, the Michael Zargam, the theorist behind conviction voting, he likes he compared it to like electrical systems and biological systems, where anytime you have a time weighted element, you're denoising, you're creating a more stable system that's able to ignore extreme swings in whatever your environment is, and kind of like persist with whatever is like going to stand the test of time. Um, and so within governance, where we see that being really valuable is in preventing things like last minute vote swings or like flash in the pan sentiment that is more based on like a fad or like a short term thing. Um, and and so now the question, now that we have Gardens V2 and now that we have modular conviction voting, is like how do we structure decisions to take advantage of that strength of conviction voting? Because yeah, it has its strengths and weaknesses, and there's some implementations that are probably going to work really well, and we just need to find them and fine tune those within Gardens.
Yeah, so maybe kind of like to review a bit, because for some people that might have been it could be quite a lot. Um, so Michael Zargum, friend of the podcast, invented kind of theorized, conviction voting, and One Hive was one of the first, or Gardens was one of like the first, I think, instances of making conviction voting real. And basically, conviction voting, as I kind of like understand it, is like you have some tokens that are maybe like a governance token that you use to vote on things. So the more governance tokens you have, the more votes you have. And in standard kind of like, say DAO governance, there is like sort of the amount of tokens you have is equal to the amount of power you have. And so like you can buy a ton of tokens and you could put it, you can like change kind of entire decisions about what a DAO is doing if you like own enough of them. Uh, Conviction voting kind of adds the caveat where it's not just about the number of tokens you necessarily have, but the amount of time that you're willing to stake those tokens towards a particular proposal. So if I have, 100 tokens, it's not just that my voting power is 100 because I just vote like yes on a proposal, but my vote is the 100 that I put in there. And then by keeping it there over time, there's like, at least in the the UI of Gardens, you see like this like thermometer type of looking bar where you see it kind of like slowly go up over time. And of course, the more people that put their tokens, stake it onto a particular proposal, the faster you'll reach the end of like the thermometer, the gauge, and then that will kind of like elicit that it'll signal that this proposal has passed, for example. I studied neuroscience in school, and so the comparison of an action potential is what I kind of read into some of Michael Zargum's work. I thought was really interesting as like a potential way to think about governance, and like all the things that you said kind of helps mitigate the kind of real human issues that come with governance, to kind of put a kind of like slight pump the brakes a little bit just in case things are like it's not just about having a ton of tokens, but also do you have conviction that this is a good proposal, which I
Yeah,
find really fascinating.
yeah. Um, I so one thing that people sometimes confuse with conviction voting, and so there's this idea of like a V token, a locked governance token, where you can multiply your governance power by locking your tokens for a certain amount of time. Um, that and some mechanisms that are designed that way are even calling themselves conviction voting. And I think it's really important to distinguish that it's the the mindset behind choosing to lock your tokens ahead of time for a certain amount of time to multiply governance power is not taking advantage of the benefits of time weighted voting, um, because you're effectively punishing your future self with how badly you want a decision in the moment. You're not being rewarded for your past self's decision that you have stuck with over time. And so it's really important that any conviction voting mechanism uses that style and not the V token style. um, and then one other thing I'll add is, one of the really cool features with Gardens V2 is that we have custom voting weight strategies. So we have one token, one vote, which is how it's worked in Gardens V1. But with these modular conviction voting pools, you can customize those to be. You can have quadratic voting. You can have fixed voting where everyone in the community has the same voting weight. We also have a capped one where it's one token, one vote up to a limit. So that like further gives you flexibility in like how to structure the democracy of how those decisions are getting made.
Hey there, listeners. Before we jump back into today's episode, I want to take a moment to talk about how you can support the Blockchain Socialists and help us continue our mission of providing a voice for alternative and radical viewpoints on crypto. As a creator, there are typically three main ways to generate revenue: advertising, affiliate sponsors, and audience funding. For us, the first two options don't align with our values or the radical nature of our content, That's why we rely on audience funding to pay for the costs associated with producing the show. By becoming a patron on Patreon, you're not just providing financial support, you're actively participating in the growth of a community dedicated to creating high-quality content on the crypto and blockchain space from a political point of view. Your contributions to Patreon enable us to create more in-depth content, bring on amazing guests, and explore issues that matter to you without the constraints of traditional sponsorship. When you join us on Patreon, you'll receive access to exclusive content, blockchain socialist swag, and a copy of my critically acclaimed book, Blockchain Radicals, in digital format. More importantly, you'll play a vital role in sustaining our community of like-minded people who share your passion for meaningful change in the blockchain space. If you're looking for a more decentralized option, consider joining TBS DAO, which is a crypto alternative to Patreon by paying in Bread, a post-capitalist cryptocurrency, which you can find more information on my website. However you support, your contributions make a real impact. Together, we can amplify the voices pushing the boundaries of what's possible and help spread the message that blockchain does not need to be used to further entrench capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it. So if that message resonates with you, I hope you'll consider helping out. Oh, nice. That's really neat. Yeah. I think part of the things that definitely have that was one of the kind of things that got me interested in the crypto space in the first place, before any of this like really existed, was like, this is a like a design space for various, forms of governance. And the point is not to necessarily find, what is the mechanism, the voting mechanism that's going to solve all of our problems and make everyone happy. Like that doesn't, I'm very, very skeptical that exists. But I think exploring with different, combinations of governance mechanisms is like, I think, a very fruitful endeavor to try to figure out like what works and what doesn't work in this or that situation, rather than like, clearly, token voting on the face of it doesn't really work, or at least doesn't work for every organization. And so I think this kind of setup allows for way more experimentation for organizations that just have a very different kind of purpose and ethos than like maybe your big DeFi DAO that is okay with token voting because they're like very profit oriented or something like that.
Breadchain, which maybe you can talk a little bit more about, but one of the things about my understanding of what Breadchain is that's really interesting is the idea of a governance token that's essentially a fixed value. Like that over time, it seems to me more and more like the best governance token has a stable value, because but like getting decision making power with a token is really important, and you're you're a node in the brain of a collective group that is needing to make decisions. And if you poison um, that system with speculation, you can get really unhealthy like types of decisions. Basically, the only reason that you should hold the governance token is because you care about what the community is doing, and you want to have a say, or you want to have ownership in how those decisions are getting made. And it seems like a stable coin, like the safest way to do that.
Yeah, I think in the Breadchain case specifically, so in case people don't know, Breadchain is a project that I co-founded, and the Bread token is pegged to the US dollar, and Bread is basically a token that helps fund the ecosystem, and it also functions as kind of, I wouldn't say voting power in itself per se, but when you hold Bread, you gain voting power that you are allowed to vote on in a very, very narrow scope. That narrow scope is simply being able to decide what is the distribution of yield that is accumulated to the various member projects. So if you hold Bread, if you hold 100 Bread for this voting cycle, which is 30 days, then in the next 30-day voting cycle, you'll have 100 voting power. And so we've kind of like, part of the purpose of what we were doing was sort of like, we wanted to make a system that didn't involve any sort of speculative token. and keep it stable as possible. Of course, you can argue that that just means that people who have more money have more say. And I think that is a fair thing to say, but I think we do things to mitigate that, which is, half of the yield is based on the vote, and half of the yield is based on an even split. So it's not like 100% decided by simply the amount of money someone owns. And also, the scope is only for deciding that distribution. And so basically, if you can kind of, if you cheat the system, as in like one member project has one billionaire backer, the way that the system is set up is so that it's not, if that billionaire backer just votes for one project, it still benefits the entire network. So we're kind of like, you know trying to grow the pie together, basically. Um, and so that's kind of like where we don't really necessarily, I wouldn't say we have like a governance token. It's like a derivative almost of a governance token in some way. Um, that it just has its own affordances compared to like other types of governance tokens. And yeah, definitely not trying to say that one is the best, or something like that, but it's something that we've been experimenting with. And so I love hearing, these other types of experiments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it.
And need to make sure I remember to say that we have a proposal up in the One Hive Gardens instance for people to vote on getting One Hive to bake some bread so that they can also hold some bread in their own treasury, and yeah, build some collaborations there. So if you're interested in One Hive, definitely check it out. Get yourself some honey, and I hope you'll vote for the proposal that I put up for the organization to bake some bread. So that would be all on Gnosis Chain. But I digress.
Well, yeah, this is kind of how we got in touch because, um, yeah, this is working through our V2 garden. We have this brand new treasury allocation system. It's totally experimental. This is the first iteration of it. We're not sure what winds up working and what doesn't work from it. But the way that it's structured right now is that there's two different treasury management pools. One of them is for deciding the portfolio weights. So OneHive holds these tokens, and what percentage of its portfolio should be held in each token. And so we're using a conviction voting pool where people can support or remove support, and the treasury will be adjusted to reflect those new weights. So that's one pool, and then there's a second pool for like actions with the treasury, and that's things like adding tokens to the treasury, removing tokens from the treasury, or doing something with some of the tokens in the treasury, that is it like staking it, or um, basically something beyond just selling and buying the token to meet a portfolio weight. So yeah, that's the pool that the bread proposal is in. So it's like the proposal is, use One Hive Treasury to bake bread, and there's a threshold parameter where if it reaches that threshold, then the the safe will execute that action.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that is an interesting like type of proposal where conviction voting is really interesting, because I'm actually not like so aware of any other DAO that allows you to kind of influence what are the assets that they hold. So I thought that was really interesting as like one of the types of proposals that Gardens kind of facilitates. So voting on what you want your DAO, what assets you want your DAO to hold, and it does it in a way that's like, I mean, I'm just like it's like a aggregation of kind of input from the community, which is really interesting. Are there any other kind of types of proposals that you have found as being like really really good for conviction voting?
Um, yeah, I think the assets themselves are managed in a safe. That safe has signers. That was immediately flagged as a centralization issue, and so one of the pools is an election, and so the community can propose new signers to the safe, or they can dispute or remove support from existing signers in the safe. and that serves as a continuous election for who the signers on that safe are, to kind of democratize ownership of the treasury assets within the community. But very broadly, the like that type of bottom up governance, that like people being able to make those types of decisions for the entire collective, is the type of thing that you really need something secure like conviction voting to even have be possible, without the type of abuse that you can imagine if like Aave or Curve was managing their treasury that way. And so yeah, the time element lets people see if someone's abusing it. There's uh, proposals are disputable, and so if there is abuse, then anyone in the community can flag it, and it goes to arbitration. And so the system is designed to enable that type of bottom up governance, with the theory that you can have a stronger organization if people from the bottom level actually have autonomy to uh, do what they believe the community should do, and get the resources and people that they need to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, necessary. Yeah. It's yeah. I think for me, I think if you're like also a cybernetics nerd, or like interested in the idea of cybernetics, I think this is something that, at least for me, is really exciting. Um, but I'm curious, is like for people maybe who are listening, like, do you have any advice or suggestions on how they should start their own garden? I know you mentioned uh, the the covenant, which I think is a really neat idea, because it's like, I think it's like, you know, taking at, for what it is, like that code is not law, that like you need to have some sort of qualitative understanding about what is the purpose of your organization. And we don't really have, like, the technology is definitely not there, if it can ever be there, to like understand like these human nuances and like ideas of like purpose and desire at a collective level that people want. You can't really just implement that in like smart contract code on its own, or very difficult. But what you can do, which I think is interesting, is have this document publicly available for people to look at and be able to interpret, and then use, the smart contract code for governance to kind of facilitate the negotiation between the various parties in an organization, rather than, like, for me, what I think is interesting is not trying to like force feed everything into like a smart contract, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and a couple of the tools that are good for the covenant specifically, Nathan Schneider has a platform, Community Info, um, and that's a template for like a 0 to 1 community. Basically, like you have a group of people and you're trying to do something together, that walks you through the process of like, okay, why do you exist? What are your values? What are going to be your cultural norms? How are you going to transition power if in these situations? And just kind of like gives you a like walk through step with like pre-existing templates also to kind of like
Nice.
give you that covenant in the end. And then, because again,
Mm-hmm.
that's like the hardest step zero of like forming a digital community, is agreeing on what you're going to do, and like the
What is the
terms.
point?
Yeah,
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 the
that's
purpose.
there's another one, Community Canvas. We have Notion documents. The main one is like how to grow using gardens, and that's kind of like slowly being populated with a lot of like the best practices for this. We're like just starting to put in some of the first experiments in like specific applications of conviction voting. So like this council safe
Mm.
election, the safe election, that's something that we'll be reporting on like what we're learning from that in that library.
Mm.
But yeah, I can share that
Nice.
document.
Yeah, sure. So would you like what how would you kind of describe the steps to starting a garden, I guess? Step number 1, have a group of friends maybe that you want to do something with, have a purpose that's clear, go through the process of creating a covenant, deploy that covenant, I believe, on IPFS. Is that how you guys do it? And then begin
Hmm.
deploying everything else?
Yeah. Yeah, and so the create a community page is like very simple. You have that covenant, you upload the text, you have your community name, and then like the only other decisions to make are what's your governance token, what's the token that people are going to stake to join the community, and how much do they need to stake to be a member? Are you going to take a fee? Who's the fee receiver, and how much fee are you going to take? Um, and then the only other option is does the um, the council safe. So yeah, how much are you going to stake? Is there a fee? What's the fee receiver? And then the council safe that's the moderator. It's the safe account that is able to approve pools to become active, change the settings in conviction voting pools. um, the goal is for that to not be a money manager and be able to moderate the money being managed in other mechanisms. I think we still have a long ways to go to for like gardens to be a rich enough environment for that to be the case. But the council safe is that has admin permissions in the community. Um, and so the last option is whether or not they are able to kick people out of the community. So that's kind of like the one power that you can give the council safe is can they boot members? And obviously someone can come back and join from another wallet, or even the same wallet, because we realized that you weren't going to protect against that. So the way to protect against that is with a community fee. So your community
Right.
fee serve as
I,
scam protection, basically.
yeah, I mean, I think it's that these are like harder human problems that like that there isn't like a quick and easy technical solution to, and should there even be necessarily like you know if you want to be in a community, you have to act like a community. That means dealing with the types of issues that communities deal with, which, you know, I mean, sometimes people get angry and they, you know, don't like the direction or whatever else. And that's something that, you know, technology is never going to fix that so much. Or is it going to make it completely go away? So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the council safe is kind of a new element of centralization. That was something that would not have flown in the original One Hive, but it's solving an issue of in Gardens V1, you need to do governance to make administrative changes like adjusting the parameters in the pool. And so that's like the most governance intensive types of decisions where you need X% quorum and you need everyone to be paying attention and making a decision together. And like the efficiency of having a group that is responsible for like those types of administrative decisions is like was too beneficial, and so the protection against that is that we put that underneath the permissionless layer above it, which is the ecosystem. Which, if you don't like the way that your council safe is upholding the covenant, then you create a new community in the same ecosystem with the same governance token and your own council safe. And if people like your community better, they'll remove their stake from that other community, and
mhm.
they'll move to your community. So that's kind of the like easy forkability to like keep that
Right,
permissionless.
right. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, yeah, I think uh, again, it's like not about making the technology that fix all the human problems, but instead, creating the railings to which you are able to solve those problems yourselves as a community, collectively.
Yeah, at the end of
So,
the day, it's the
yeah,
quality of the people that are going to decide whether you're a good community or not.
right. Yeah, yeah. No, so I really appreciate the type of work that you guys are doing and like the things that you're building. It's definitely super exciting for me, and definitely would love to have more people have their eye on and to take part in and to, yeah, I mean, start building communities and start building some gardens. Um, Maybe to finish it off, I mean, is there any last words you want to leave, or do you want to leave, or we can end it? You can leave some of your plugs and where people can keep up with Gardens and you and your work?
Um, yeah, follow us on Twitter. Um, good, dig into our Notion docs to learn how you can create a community. The types of organizations that we're building for are Web3 communities, obviously, open source projects, real world communities. Um, we're especially excited about pop-up cities and intentional communities, since those are really well structured with that ethos of decentralization and community. Um, and the goal that, like, not just my goal, but I think that we have a strong cohort in crypto that is kind of coalescing on this goal, that what we really can do in crypto is make public goods much better funded and much better managed than they are today. And and like, I think Giveth describes it as like we're replacing governments and nonprofits, and those are specifically the organizations that we are kind of depending on for all of the stuff where the economy falls short, where our private markets don't meet all of these things because there's not a good uh, profit model, basically, to create that value for people. And so we call all of these public goods, and that's like our opportunity in this space. That's where the world is failing us, and where we can step in and use these people and this technology to make it significantly better.
Yeah, sure, definitely. I definitely agree with the vision of using crypto as the railings for new institutions that will, and to show that we can, by working bottom up collectively, we can build things that answer to our community's needs, um, potentially even better than the current institutions that are, I mean, for the most part, in a lot of places, failing people. So, totally agree on that vision. And yeah, appreciate you coming on. And yeah, looking forward to see what you guys are building with Gardens.
Nice. Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was fun.